Let's share the screen. All right, so I think both are now working, and let's start from where we were last time. So I think we introduced the definition of continuity last time, and so we started with limits of a function at a point, and then we looked at continuity of a function at a point, and we were trying to figure out some equivalent criteria characterization of continuity. One, the very first thing that we did was characterization of continuity in terms of sequences, right? Okay, so this was the discussion in the morning. Let's just switch to the next page. So this is lecture 21 now, if I am not mistaken. So do you see lecture 21 at your end?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. Okay. So we defined what is the meaning of a function to be continuous at a point. We gave an equivalent characterization of this epsilon delta definition in terms of sequences. We understood what is a meaning of a function to be continuous on a set, if it's continuous at each point. And I think the last thing that we did was we stated this theorem without proof. So let me just state this theorem. It said that suppose that x and y are metric spaces, and let f be a function from x into y, then f is continuous on the set x if and only if the following criteria is met, which is in terms of open sets. So what does it say? It says that f inverse of u is open in X for every u that is open in Y. So what are we doing here? I have a metric space X, a metric space Y, a map F, and you have an open set U here. Yeah. Yeah. So U subset of Y is open. You pull it back via F. Yeah. So if this is my entire set X, so then its pre-image is this. Something like this. Yeah. So this is. So what is F inverse U? By definition, these are all the points in X which are mapped into U via F. So if that happens, that F inverse U is open in X for every open subset U in Y, then the function F is continuous and vice versa. If F is continuous, then F inverse U is open in X for every U that is open in Y. So, before we sort of see the proof, let's see an example application of this theorem. So let's see an example. So let's consider a function which is a self map of the real line, function from the real line into itself, both endowed with a Euclidean metric. Suppose that f is defined as follows. Yeah. So this is the same function that we considered last time. So this is the indicator function for rationals. So f takes the value 1 if x is a rational point, or it is 0 otherwise. Right? So we saw an argument last time using sequences to show that f fails to be continuous at every real number, right? How do we, verify this using the theorem, the statement that we have just seen? So if f were to be continuous on the real line, then f inverse u should be open in R for every u that is open in R. Okay. So can you demonstrate to me? So I say that this function fails to be continuous. Yeah. So in that case, what is that you have to do? You have to find me one single u naught which is open in the real line such that its pullback under f fails to be open in R. So can you give me an example? So everybody is with me. Do we realize what is that I'm asking? I'm saying that look at this function f. It is defined like this. Yeah, last time we all agreed f is not continuous on the real line, right? In fact, it fails to be continuous at every point. Now, if this theorem is true, then you should be able to find a set u naught in R such that its inverse image fails to be open in R. So do you want to suggest some u naught that will do the job here? So the image actually is just a 2-point set, the range here. So can you find an open set here such that you pick a u naught here such that if you pull it back via f inverse u naught is not open as a subset of R? What should be my choice here? U naught is open, but this is not open. Somebody wants to suggest something? Okay. Am I audible here? Yeah, 16 students here. Am I audible? Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so is the question clear? What is that you have to find? You have to give me an example of u naught such that, don't be afraid. You start with any open set and let me know. Yeah, what is there? Let's try. Such that f inverse u naught fails to be open.
Open interval minus half to plus half.
So the suggestion is, let's take u naught to be the open interval minus half to plus half. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So this interval contains 0 but not 1, right? Which means that what would be the inverse image of this set? Yeah, so this would be all points in the real line by definition such that f of x belongs to u naught, yeah, which is this interval minus half to half. So what is this set? The way the function is defined, f takes the value 0 and 1. These are the only two possibilities. Now 0 is inside this interval and 1 is outside this interval. So what would be this set? The inverse image would be everything which is not rational. Is that correct? Yes. And is the set R minus Q open in R?
No, ma'am.
No, right? So here is a set U naught such that, please note that U naught is open in R, and however its pullback under F is the set which is the complement of the rational number, the set of irrational number, and this fails to be open in R, right? Everybody has seen this. Everybody, yeah? So conclusion, hence F cannot be continuous on the real line. Is this example okay with everybody present here? Any questions, please ask.
Ma'am, could you please repeat this example once more?
So I'm saying, see, last time we saw this example, right? And we already know that this function fails to be continuous at each real point. Do you all remember that? Yeah, you construct a sequence of irrational numbers going to a rational number and things like that. But anyways, we are not discussing that here. So in view of this theorem that we are about to prove, one should be able to find an open set here in the codomain such that if you pull that back via F, its inverse image fails to be open in the real line, in the domain set. Is that okay? Yes. So one such example is U naught. Yeah. See, why does U naught work? See, anything that, yeah, U naught. So let's see. U naught is an open interval in R. Everybody agrees? So it's an open set, right? In the Euclidean metric on R. Yeah, it's a neighborhood of each of its points. One can check that. Now, if you look at the pullback of U naught under F, so this is by definition all the points in the real line such that the image of these points under F belongs to U naught, which means the interval minus half to half. Now, F assumes only the values 0 and 1. Now, if f of x belongs to the interval minus half to half, that means f of x cannot be 1, it has to be 0. So that means that f only assumes the value 0 for these points, which means that what is x? X is outside Q, yeah? X is the set R minus Q. Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So here is a set, here is an example of a set U naught, which is open in the codomain here, R, such that its pullback is R minus Q fails to be open in R, right? Everybody has seen this. This set is not a neighborhood of any of its points, in fact. Yeah. So this theorem says that F cannot be continuous on X, which is the real line in this case. Is that okay? See, if you
Yes,
doubt,
ma'am.
please ask.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
please don't hesitate. If there is a sticky point, please ask again. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So then, is this yes with everybody present here? Is there even one student who is lost? Okay, so let's go ahead. Yeah, let's provide a proof to this theorem. So let's fix the proof. Let's begin with one part of it. So suppose first that f is continuous on the set X. Okay, now we need to show that, what we will show that f inverse u is open in X for every open subset u of y. Correct? This is what we are required to show. So let's start with an open set u of y. Yeah. So let u subset of y be open. Right? What are we required to do? We are required to consider f inverse u. The set f inverse u, it's pull back under f and show that that's an open set in X, right? Now saying that f inverse u is open in X means that f inverse u is a neighborhood of each of its points, right? So let's start with the point in f inverse u. Yeah, so fix some point arbitrarily. Let's call it P in f inverse u. What is that we are required to show? We are required to show f inverse u contains a neighborhood of the point P. Yeah, so let me draw a picture if this looks like too much analytical going on. So here's X, here is Y, this is F, this is some set U, right? You pull it back via F, so this is, the entire thing is X. So maybe this is F inverse U, this is some subset of X. I am going to pick a point P here, yeah. And I'm going to show that there is a neighborhood around P, which means that there is a tiny disk around P, which is entirely contained in F inverse U. And this is true for each point of F inverse U. F inverse U is a neighborhood of each of its points, and we would be done. Correct? Okay, so let's see. Now saying that P belongs to F inverse U means its image under F, which means F of P belongs to the set U. Yeah. So F of P is a point here. Mark it with a different color. So F of P is a point here. Yeah, this is F of P. Now U by definition is an open subset of Y. So U must contain a neighborhood of F of P, right? So there must be a tiny disk around f of P, which is entirely contained in U. Yeah. Sorry, the way I've drawn, it spills out of the set U, but it should be. Is that okay? Yeah. So let me write that down. Since what? Since U subset of Y is open and f of P is a point in U, the set U must contain a neighborhood around f of P, which means that there is an epsilon positive such that this ball centered at f of P, radius epsilon, is entirely contained in the set U. Yeah. So I'm dropping this notation D subscript Y here because it is sort of evident from the context. Is that okay? Everybody with me? Yeah. So maybe I'll sort of draw a bigger picture because this is, I think, too small for you to imagine anything. Right. So let's just quickly recall where were we? We started with U, which is an open subset of Y. This is my picture for U. And we pulled it back via F, and maybe this is my set F inverse U. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now let's start with a point P in F inverse u, yeah, by definition, its image lands in f of p, right? Now, f of p is a point in u, which is open, which means that there's a disk around f of p, an open neighborhood around f of p, which is, sorry, not a disk, an open ball around f of p, which must be entirely sitting inside u, yeah? So I have denoted the radius of this ball as epsilon. So this is an epsilon neighborhood, right? Okay. Now, what does the continuity of f says? F is continuous on x means that given epsilon, there is always a positive delta such that what happens? Such that whenever I am in delta neighborhood of the point P, and I pick a point here within this delta neighborhood of the point P, I land via F into the epsilon neighborhood of point F of P. So this is the point F of X. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, so let's recall the definition of continuity. Since F is continuous on X corresponding to this epsilon, there is a delta such that what happens? Such that, so let me just write it down. I'm just recalling the definition here. Yeah. Continuity of the entire set X, so this is not required whenever this happens. So what is it saying? It says that there is a delta such that for all points X in the delta neighborhood of the point P, f of X lies in this prescribed epsilon neighborhood of the point f of P. Yeah? This is exactly saying, as we discussed this last time, that if you look at the delta neighborhood of the point P, this is mapped via F into epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P. Is this okay? Is everybody with me up till this point?
Ma'am, can you please explain the last statement?
This last inclusion?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So is that Priyanshu?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. See, Priyanshu, I've just rewritten this definition of continuity one more time. See, saying that F is continuous on X guarantees me that having fixed this epsilon, there would be a delta such that whenever I am within delta distance of the point P, that would imply that the image F of X is within epsilon distance of F of P, right? You agree with this, that d of fx fp is less than epsilon whenever d of xp is less than delta, correct? This is just the epsilon delta definition of continuity. I'm just rewriting in this in one more time, saying that x is in distance between x and p is less than delta means x belongs to this ball. Yeah, so let me use a different color. Saying that the distance between x and p is less than delta exactly means that x belongs to the ball around p of radius delta with respect to the metric on x, correct? And saying that the distance between f of x and f of p is less than epsilon is exactly saying that f of x belongs to the ball centered at f of p radius epsilon, right? So what is it saying? Whenever x belongs to this delta neighborhood of the point of p, f of x belongs to epsilon neighborhood of the point f of p, and this is true for every x in this delta neighborhood, which means that if you look at this delta neighborhood of the point p, The image of this entire delta neighborhood is contained in this epsilon neighborhood of f of p. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So which means that in this picture here, this green region that I have drawn must lie here inside this somewhere. Yeah. This is this green patch that I'm drawing is exactly, so this is, I should not have scribbled like this. Sorry, I'll just try to draw a clear picture. Oh, what am I doing? Yeah, so this green thing, what is this green thing here? The green thing, so this is the ball centered at p radius delta, and over here it is the image of this ball under f. It would always be contained in this red region, which is the epsilon neighborhood of f of p, right? Is that okay? Now if you put together 1 and 2, so combining 1 and 2 means what? So gives us the following, yeah, that you look at this delta neighborhood of the point P, its image under F, this is sitting inside epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P, which in turn is sitting inside the set U, right? Yeah. So it follows that that if you look at the delta neighborhood of the point P, this is contained in the inverse of f of right. Yes, this is always true. This is set theory here. The first inclusion that the ball, this is always true. Yeah. So what am I writing here? I'll just sort of maybe highlight it in a different color. So the first inclusion that I have written here is f of f inverse E is a subset of E. This is always true for all subsets E. Yeah, so this is when for all subsets E of I. That's what I have written here. Is that okay? This is basic set theory, nothing else. You spend 2 minutes, you will get it. So that's the first thing. But what does the above inclusion tell me? The above inclusion tells me that this set here is contained in F inverse of U. And we are done. So the set F inverse U indeed contains a neighborhood of the point P. This means that F inverse U contains a neighborhood of the point P, and P was any arbitrary point of the set F inverse U. The set F inverse U contains a neighborhood of each of its points, and hence we are done. Is that okay? If any questions, please ask. Okay, is this all right with everybody? Is everybody with me up till this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So let's look at the other part of this proof. So we say that now what is that we are required to show? Suppose that F inverse U is open in X for every open subset U of Y, and we are required to show that F is continuous on X. So suppose that F inverse of U is open in X for every open subset U of Y. What are we required to show? We are required to show that the function F is continuous. We will show that the function F is continuous at every point of X, yeah, which means that the function F is continuous on X. Yeah, which means that we are required to show that we show that I'm just rewriting the goal. We show that so having fixed a point P of X, we show that for every positive epsilon there is a corresponding delta, possibly depending on the point P, such that sorry. Such that if you look at the delta neighborhood of the point P and consider its image under F, that must be contained in the epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P. Correct? Is that okay? Is that okay? Everybody with me? That
Yes,
this is
ma'am.
what we are required to do? Okay, so let's do this. So let's fix an epsilon positive. Yeah, you give me an epsilon and I will try to convince you that we can always find a delta satisfying this. Yeah, so you fix an epsilon positive, and the first thing we notice that this ball, open balls are always, these are, neighborhoods are always open sets. So just use that since this since this epsilon neighborhood around the point F of P is an open set in Y, by the given condition, its inverse image under F, if you pull it back under F, that must be an open set in X. Yeah. So let's just write that down. It follows that the set, its pullback of this set under F. Now this is a subset of X. This is open. Correct? Now, so let's see what is happening here. You have X, you have Y. What is that we had? We had F of P is a point here of X. We look at its image under F. That was a point F of P. We looked at an epsilon neighborhood around the point F of P. So let me draw that. This is an epsilon neighborhood around F of P. Now we pulled it back via F, but before that we knew that via continuity there is a delta neighborhood around the point P. I'll just draw that in a different color. So there is delta neighborhood around the point P. So this is such that its image, forward image under F, so this is in red ink, the image of this delta neighborhood of the point P is contained in this epsilon neighborhood of F of P, right? Now that's one observation. This is courtesy continuity. This is what we are required to do. Sorry, what am I saying? I'm so sorry if this is just too confusing. I'm so sorry. Let me just erase it and I'm so sorry about it. See, delta is something that we have to find. Let's just go over this argument one more time. I sort of unnecessarily confused you. Yeah. So what is given to us is that F inverse U is open in X for every open set U of Y, and we are required to find a delta fulfilling this condition, right? So there's no delta as of now. We are yet to get it. Yeah, I'm so sorry about it. So let's look at this. You fix an epsilon and you look an epsilon neighborhood around the point F of P. This is an open subset of Y, surely. Yeah, and you pull it back under F. So when you pull it back, you get some subset of X. Yeah. So if when you pull this epsilon neighborhood of F of P under F, you get some subset of F. We don't care what that subset is, but the important thing to note is that the point P, yeah. So the first thing to note is that the point P is in this subset. So the point P would belong to this subset. Everybody agrees with me? Yeah, because you know F of P is indeed contained in the ball centered at FP, no matter what radius it is. Yeah. So this set contains the point P, and the other thing that we know about this set is that this is an open subset of X. Yeah, two things. Is that okay? Now, by assumption, this is an open subset of X which contains the point P, so it must contain a neighborhood of the point P, right? So I'll just write that down, that since P belongs to this set and this set is open by our analysis, this set must contain a neighborhood around point P, which exactly means that there is a delta positive such that a ball around P, radius delta, is sitting inside this set. Right? So in pictures, what does it mean? It means that if you pull this, epsilon neighborhood around F of P, you may get some set. Yeah. So this is my picture to denote. So you look at the epsilon neighborhood of point P and you pull it back via F. This is this set. Now this is an open set which contains P, so there must be, this must contain a neighborhood around each of its points, in particular the point P. Yeah, so that's what we are trying to say. So there is a neighborhood around the point P such that this neighborhood is entirely sitting inside this set. Is that okay with everybody? Is that okay?
Ma'am, could you please explain once again, like from that Means I have understood up to that F inverse B of F P epsilon is a subset of X is open. After that, can you explain once?
Right. Now this is an open subset of X and this contains the point P. Yeah. So therefore it must contain a neighborhood around point P. That's all I am saying, Kritika. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just unnecessarily confused everybody here. But yeah, I'll be careful next time onwards. But is this okay with everybody else now? Yes. Is that okay? Yeah, now let's just look at the last inclusion here that we proved. Now, if this ball centered at P, radius delta is contained in this set here, right? As per the picture that we have drawn. So if you push it forward by F, which means its image, so then what is going to happen? That means the image of this ball is going to contained in F of F inverse. Is that okay? Which is contained in the ball centered at FP radius epsilon. Is that okay? Yeah, so all I'm trying to say is that if you look at this delta neighborhood of the point P and push it forward by F, then its image will be something like this. So this is what I've drawn in green ink, is the image of this delta neighborhood of the point P under F. So what has this achieved? Corresponding to this fixed epsilon, we have found a delta such that whenever we are in delta neighborhood of the point P, its image lands in epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P. This is exactly what continuity of F at the point P demands, and we are done. Is this okay?
Ma'am,
Yes, please.
can you go through the second part quickly because I got lost in the middle.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was very confusing. Yeah, so let's just start with the beginning. Under the assumption, we are working under the assumption that F inverse U is open in X for every open set U of Y. We are required to show that the function F is continuous at the point P. Yeah, P is any arbitrary point. You pick a point and say that F is continuous. So what we will do is we will fix an epsilon positive and show that there is a delta such that whenever we are in delta neighborhood of the point P, it is mapped via F into epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P. Correct? Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So now let's fix an epsilon. We have already fixed the point P in X. You look at epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P. Right? Now, epsilon neighborhood of the point F of P, by definition, is an open subset of Y. So using the given assumption, its pullback under F is certainly an open subset of X, right? So I'm looking at this entire thing as U now. Yeah, so this is my candidate for U. Yeah, this entire thing is my U, and I'm looking at, so this entire thing is F inverse U. Is that okay? Yeah, so U subset of Y is given. So it follows that its inverse image, F inverse U subset of X is open. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Now, however, what is evident is that the point P belongs to this set here. Right? Why does the point P belongs to this? You know, you are looking at epsilon neighborhood of F of P, and I'm just pulling it back by a F inverse. So the point P belongs to this set because FP belongs to this epsilon neighborhood of F of P, correct? And now this is an open subset of X. So in particular, it must contain a neighborhood around the point P. So there must be a delta such that this delta neighborhood of the point P is contained in F inverse U. Yeah, this is my F inverse U. Is that okay, Raika? And everybody else?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Yes? Now I'm saying I'm almost done. I'm going to now apply F both sides. So if BP delta, this delta neighborhood of P is contained in F inverse U, so the image under F of this delta neighborhood must be contained in F of F inverse U. But F of F inverse U is always contained in U. That's all I'm using here. Yeah, so again, F of F inverse U is always contained in U for every U in Y. This is just set theory. You don't require U to be open or closed or whatever for any set. So that's being used here. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, however, I will just use this opportunity to point it out to you that if I look at the other way, so if you look at, a set G, subset of X, and consider its image. Now, F of G would be a subset of Y, and then you pull it back via F. Yeah, so you apply F first and follow it by F inverse. Now, this inclusion that F inverse Fg is contained in G, this is not true in general. So I will just write that it is not true, not in general true that something to be kept in mind. This is very basic set theory. I'm sure all of you can work out examples. However, what I've written in the red box is always true. Yeah, something to think about. Okay, anyways, let's get back to, this was just an observation on the side. Let's get back to the proof. Yeah, so see, I would apologize again. I just confused all of you, but hope this is okay. If not, we will just come back to it one more time, but maybe give yourself some time. So let's go back to the statement. What does it say? It gives a characterization of continuity in terms of open sets, right? This has some very, very interesting applications. Let's just take them, one of them, right? Okay. So corollary to this theorem. So let X and Y be metric spaces, and let F be a continuous function from X into Y. So let F be a continuous function from X into Y. Yeah. Suppose that X is compact. Yeah. We now know what is the meaning of X to be compact. Right? So F is a continuous function from X into Y. Assume that X is compact, then F of X is compact. Right? So this is saying continuous functions always take compact sets to compact sets. Right? So for example, let's just see an example. So suppose I ask you the following question. Can there be or let me just reword it like this. Find all continuous functions f from closed interval 0, 1 which are surjections. So let me just say, so let me just write it clearly. Let me just find from find all continuous surjections from closed interval 0, 1 onto open interval 0, 1. Yeah? So what are you required to do here? You look at continuous functions from closed interval 0, 1 into open interval 0, 1. You have to single out the ones which are onto and find all of them. So what should be your answer? What would be your answer? Okay, so let me go slow. So does everybody understand what is the meaning of a surjection?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that surjection? Yeah, everybody understands what is a surjection, right? So, so now let me just rewrite the question if that seems better. So you look at f from closed interval 0, 1. Now I want f to be onto open interval 0, 1. So this is a surjection, and I want f to be continuous. Two things, right? Can you find all such f? Can you give me one such example of a f like this? Okay, so let's see. If you look at this corollary one more time, then what I've written in blue ink here, what is x here? X here is closed interval 0, 1. Is that compact with respect to the Euclidean metric on R?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so that's the Heine-Borel theorem. So x is compact and let f be, so let's start like this. Yeah, so let f from this into this be a continuous function. Yeah, so far I am not assuming onto. So the above theorem tells me that then the image of this under F is also compact. Correct? Is that okay? Is that yes? This is assuming the corollary to be true. I am saying that this image is going to be compact. Correct? Continuous functions take compact sets to compact sets. Now, if I moreover demand F to be continuous, what does it tell you about the image? It says that the range is exactly the codomain, which means that this is going to be open interval 0, 1. Furthermore, for F to be onto, the range of F must equal the codomain of F, right? Is that okay? Is that a yes with everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, but open interval 0, 1 cannot be compact. It's not compact with respect to the Euclidean metric on R. Why? Because it's not closed. Every compact set has to be closed as far as the Euclidean metric is concerned. So what is the upshot of all these discussions? There aren't any continuous surjections from closed interval 0, 1 onto open interval 0, 1. There are none. Is that okay? Is everybody with me on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that a yes with everybody present here? A continuous function always takes compact sets onto compact sets. The image of closed interval 0, 1 under a continuous function better be a compact set. So it cannot be open interval 0, 1 no matter what. Yeah. Okay. I think it's time to go back to the corollary. Yeah. So let's try to establish the corollary. Yeah. So this was just an example to emphasize that this is indeed a very powerful result. Okay, so let's look at the proof to the corollary. Yeah, so let's recall the statement. Suppose that f from x into y is a continuous function from a compact metric space x to a metric space y. We are required to show f of x is compact, right? So that means that one should look at any arbitrary open cover of f of x and try to extract a finite subcover. Yeah. So let's say that. So let u alpha be any, well, be an, yeah. So this be an arbitrary open cover of f of x. We will show that there are finitely many u alphas such that their union of these finitely many u alphas cover or contain f of x. Yeah, that would show that f of x is compact. However, what is that we are given? We are given that x is compact, right? So I have x here, I have y here. Yeah, so this is my set y. Now f maps x into y, which means that the image, so let's look at the image. So let's say this is my image f of x. Yeah, so this is f of x, right? And what is U alphas? U alphas, I'm drawing a picture in R2 with respect to the Euclidean metric on R2. U alphas are open cover of f of x. Yeah, so there are these balls. So this is U alpha, which such that their union covers f of x, right? And things like that. Okay, all right. What is that we are given? We are given that f is continuous and we are given that x is compact, right? This is the given information. Okay. So let's see, right? So U alpha is an open cover of f of x, which means that each U alpha is open. Now, what do? We appeal to the continuity on f. See, somehow we have to get to an open cover of x in order to exploit the compactness of x, right? So we have to, using this cover U alpha, we have to construct an open cover of x, right? So what comes handy here is, recall each U alpha is open. So then we pull it back via f and we say that f inverse of U alpha, f inverse of U alpha. So for each alpha fixed, f inverse of U alpha is going to be open in x. Why is that? Because f is given to be continuous. Yeah, so which means that inverse image of open sets is going to be open set, right? You start with U alpha, which is open in y. Its inverse image under x, which is f inverse of U alpha, is going to be open in x. What I am claiming is that if you look at this collection, so let's say alpha belongs to some indexing set, let's say A. If you look at this collection, then this is indeed an open cover of x. Correct? Is that okay? Now, for each alpha, f inverse U alpha is open using the continuity of f. And why does the union of these f inverse alpha cover x or contain x? That's because U alphas contain f of x in their union. Sure, is that okay? Is everybody with me up till this point? Are there any questions or is this okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, is that okay with everybody present here? Okay, good. I sort of at least have one student saying yes. Okay, now what do? We use the compactness of x to get a finite subcover, right? Since x is compact, there are finitely many of these f inverse U alpha. There are finitely many indices let's call them alpha 1, alpha 2, and let's say alpha n naught, such that x is contained in the union of f inverse U alpha 1 union f inverse U alpha 2 all the way up till f inverse U alpha n naught, right? This is just compactness of X. Right. So remember, what is that we are given? We are given a continuous function. X is compact. F is from X into Y. We are required to show that the image F of X is compact. So we started with an open cover of F of X. Using that, we constructed an open cover of X, applied the compactness of X to get a finite subcover. And I think we are done because if this is the case, then U alpha 1, so union U alpha 2, union U alpha naught, N naught, yeah, this forms a finite subcover of F of X. So what have we done? Corresponding to any arbitrary cover that we started off, we were able to extract a finite subcover, right? And this would show the compactness of F of X, right? So let me sort of justify this last statement that I have made. So this is because since so what is that I have shown? So X is contained in the union of F inverse U alpha I varying from 1 to N naught, correct? This is, I just rewriting statement A here, correct? Yeah. And now I am interested in F of X, so I'm going to apply F both sides. The inclusion is still preserved, right? Now, this right hand side is going to be contained in, I'm going to take F inside, that still remains true, F of U alpha I, yeah. And you know, F of F inverse of this is always contained in this, yeah. So this is contained in, so I don't disturb the union, that stays as it is. And F of F inverse, this is U alpha I. Yeah. So what does it say? U alpha 1, U alpha 2, all the way up till U alpha naught form an open subcover of F of X, and we are done. Yeah, is this okay with everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, the upshot of all of this discussion is that a continuous function always takes compact sets onto compact sets. See, once we are done with this string of ideas, you know, this will sort of remind you of something which you have been sort of doing forever, something very familiar. Okay, but for now, let's move on to a next corollary, which is, I think, equally interesting. This is another corollary to this theorem. This is corollary 2. I'll just renumber the first one as corollary 1. Okay, all right. So again, let X and Y be two metric spaces. Let X and Y be two metric spaces, and let F be a function from X into Y. Yeah, so let me write it like that. And suppose that F is continuous. Yeah, so let F from X into Y be a continuous function. From X into Y, and furthermore assume that X is compact. So F from X to Y be a continuous function from a compact metric space X into another metric space Y. Yeah. Suppose that F is both 1, 1 and on 2. F is injection as well as surjection. F is a bijection from X onto Y. Yeah, so if X is a bijection, then you can talk about the inverse map, right? So then the inverse function F inverse from Y to X is continuous. See, what we have been talking about earlier was set inverse. Now this is the inverse function. So I hope there is no confusion between the two. Yeah, just for the sake of clarity, recall. So the inverse function F is defined by F inverse Y equal to X, where X is the unique point in X satisfying F of X is Y. Yeah. Right? There will be one and only one point in X satisfying F of X and Y under the assumption that F is a bijection, right? So if F is a bijection, F is continuous, and X is compact, there are three things here. Yeah. So you start with a continuous function from a compact metric space, and F has to be 1 and non 2. Then the inverse map also turns out to be continuous. Yeah. Yeah. See, this is very, very sort of powerful. I'll maybe highlight some examples first, yeah, before we see the corollary examples. Okay. Let's take this. Let's take the first one. Let X be the closed interval 0, 1. This is the set X. And D be the discrete metric. Yeah, so D of X is the discrete metric. Yeah, so remember, what is it? Discrete metric means it is 0 if X is equal to Y and it is 1 otherwise. So this is my metric space X, and let's take Y to be again the set closed interval 0, 1, and let's take dy to be the Euclidean metric. Okay. And let's take let f, let's consider the following function. Let f be defined from x into y by setting f of x equal to x for every x in x. Sorry, where am I now? Sorry. So on the domain side, we have the discrete metric, and on the range side, we have the Euclidean metric. And the map is the identity map, x goes to x. Yeah, sorry, I'll just scrolling up. Yeah, here it is. Right? So clearly, f is a bijection in this case. F is 1, 1 and on 2. Correct? Is that correct? Everybody sees that? In this example, f is 1, 1 and on 2. Right? Is f continuous? Is f continuous in this example?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Why is that the case? Why is that the case?
Ma'am, we can tell it from the graph of fx.
See, how do you draw a graph here? Because x you have endowed, you know, the domain you have the discrete metric. See, metric is very, very important when we are talking about continuity. So how do you assert that f is continuous? Here's a hint. We can use the characterization of continuity in terms of open sets. F from x to y is continuous if for every open set u of y, f inverse u is open in x. So do you now see why is f continuous?
Because x and y are compact.
See, why are x and y compact? Why I agree is compact. Why is x compact? X is certainly not compact here. See, x is with respect to the discrete metric. Please remember, you know, x closed interval 0, 1 is compact when we are talking about the Euclidean metric. See, even if x and y are compact, how would that imply continuity? Okay, see, these are things that you should be able to fix on your own if you have been doing all the assignment problems religiously on your own. Let me just make this comment here, that what is that I wanted to highlight here, that here is a function f from x to y between two metric spaces, which is 1, 1 and onto. F from x to y is continuous. See, since the function f is 1, 1 and onto, I can talk about the map, inverse map. But if you look at the inverse map is what? The inverse map f from y to x, again given by what? So this is again f of x equal to x for every x in y. Or if you want, you can sort of write it as f of y equal to y. This is not continuous. And why does it happen? Much against what is that corollary to is asserting? It is saying that, in general, if you have a bijection and a continuous map, it does not guarantee that the inverse has to be continuous. Here is one example. If X is compact, then you can say that the inverse map is continuous. So what happens is, in this example, X fails to be compact. So, there are two missing links here, which I have not sent. So please note that X is not compact in this example. So here is an example of a continuous bijection whose inverse fails to be continuous. So, this is giving us two lessons. One, the metric that we are considering plays a very, very important role. And two, these are very powerful theorems with far-reaching consequences. Okay, so does this example make sense to everybody? This is saying that compactness is essential in this corollary, and that cannot be dropped. I'll give you maybe one more example, which does not consider the discrete metric. Maybe that will help the case. I see some discomfort here with respect to the discrete meaning. Yeah, let's just quickly see this example. Yeah, so let's consider f defined from close 0 open to pi into the unit circle. What is the unit circle? So this is script T that I have written here. This is all those complex numbers which are of absolute value 1, right? And so how am I going to define it? So you pick theta in close 0 open interval, and f of theta is, I map it to e to power I theta. Yeah, so this is cosine theta, sine theta. Yeah. So both, left hand side, right hand side, I have the Euclidean metric here everywhere. Yeah, if that makes you feel comfortable. Yeah. So I'll just take 2 minutes and to finish up this example, and then we stop. Right? Okay. So over here in this example, f is 1, 1 and onto. Yeah, please check that. So I have sort of not considered the point to pi in order to make sure that this map is 1, 1 and onto the unit circle. Correct? I hope everybody agrees. And so I would just say, for the clarity, I'll just write what is the domain in order to. So f takes, I will say takes 0 open to pi, 1, 1 and onto the unit circle. F is continuous. But the inverse map fails to be continuous. Where fails to be continuous, add z equal to 1. So here, there is one more example. F is a bijection, F is continuous. However, the inverse map which is defined because F is a bijection need not be continuous. In fact, it is not continuous here. And what is the problem here is, had the domain been a compact set, then we would have been fine thanks to the corollary. But that's not the case. So compactness is essential to this corollary and that cannot be dropped. Yeah. Okay. So let me just try to give you why is this inverse map failing to be continuous at z equal to 1. See, what is this map doing? So you look at, so close 0, open to pi. Yeah. So f is mapping it to a circle, right? So this is a circle, centered 0 and radius 1. Yeah. So this is the unit circle. Okay. So now if you look at the inverse map, yeah. So if you look at the point 1, yeah. So this is the point z equal to 1. What is the inverse image of the point 1? What is f inverse 1? What is f inverse 1 under this map?
Zero.
F inverse 1 is 0. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I'll just remind yourself, all of us here, that I am writing it as cosine theta, sine theta. So this is ei theta, right? Okay, so f inverse 1 is clearly 0. Very nice. However, if I take points on the circle just below 1, yeah, so if I look at a point z prime just below 1, yeah, maybe something here, z prime is equal to 1. Well, not 1, z prime is just below 1, yeah, so I'll just say erase. Yes, just look at z prime drawing like this. So what would be the image of the point, the inverse image of the point f inverse z prime? Where would that be?
Ma'am, that would be near the point 2 pi.
That would be very close to 2 pi. Excellent. Yeah. Is close to 2 pi. Yeah, very nice, right? So I will say that for points z on the circle, I'll just write it heuristically here. For points z prime on the unit circle, close, well, not close, just below 1. Yeah. Just below 1, the inverse image f inverse z prime is close to 2 pi. So clearly, this function f inverse fails to be continuous. You know, z prime and 1 are very, very close. But if you look at their inverse images, those are 0 and pi, right? Yes? So clearly, f inverse, the inverse map fails to be continuous at z equal to 1, right? You know, something to be sort of kept in mind. If you have a continuous bijection, that does not guarantee that the inverse map has to be continuous, right? Okay, I think I have overshot time, so I'll just stop right here. I would, you know, urge all of you to, you know, spend some time on this material. Okay, yeah. I'll just stop the recording now.